out! Here comes Paul!
Paul? You named it Paul?
Hey man, does it matter? Shoot them rockets at him already!
Volition's Saints Row is one of gaming's most unhinged and ridiculous series to date, and for some, that's exactly why they love it. But that era of weirdness is coming to an end with the upcoming reboot. Why is Saints Row 5 bringing the series back down to reality? And is it a good move going forward? Today, we're going to explore those questions and take a look at Saints Row's uncertain future. If you started playing the open-world action-adventure series in 2011 with Saints Row the Third, you may be surprised to know that the Saints Row brand wasn't always so strange. In fact, SR1 and 2 were pretty normal. With a few notable exceptions, the games went from a relatively straightforward gang war plot to exploring hell and fighting off an alien invasion as the superpowered president of the United States. This change in tone split the fanbase at the time and was met with some pretty heavy discourse, but it was also completely necessary. Why? Well, it's not because the original Saints Row games were bad. Writer Steve Jarris and the rest of the development team created a really well-balanced story with memorable characters wrapped up in mostly believable worlds. So they were pretty great. Instead, Volition pivoted because there was another open-world gang-oriented action-adventure series on the market, and it wasn't backing down. The second Saints Row game came out in 2008, the same year as Grand Theft Auto 4. SR2 sold 365,000 copies in its first month. GTA 4 sold 3.6 million copies in its first 24 hours. That's not even a competition. That's a slaughter. Saints Row could either live in the shadow of the GTA series for the rest of its meager existence, or it could evolve and flourish. Obviously, since we live in a timeline where this exists, Volition chose the latter. Series producer Greg Donovan and director Scott Phillips made sure of that. And with Steve Jarris once again at the narrative wheel, their step into the world of weird with Saints Row the Third was great for business. No longer was Saints Row shackled to its reputation as a GTA alternative. Now, it had its own identity. So it only made sense to up the ante for the fourth installment of the series. Of the three big players, only Scott Phillips remained as a game designer, which may be a good or bad thing depending on what you think of 2013's Saints Row 4. Jarris would return to write the game's standalone expansion, Gat Out of Hell, in 2015 though. Say what you will about Saints Row 4, but nobody can deny that it was weird. Really weird. By the time Gat Out of Hell came out, Saints Row 4 had officially been dubbed the Sistine Chapel ceiling of stupidity, and that description is incredibly apt. While the game was originally born from a cancelled expansion for Saints Row the Third, the fourth game really came into its own. From iconically ridiculous weapons to genuinely wild and creative missions, fans either adored or despised Saints Row 4. It boasted a lot of what people loved about the series. Fan-favorite characters made their return, and the customization options were as in-depth as players had come to expect. But Saints Row 4 also pushed the boundaries of the series in a way that not everyone was into. Longtime fans had originally bought into a relatively grounded, if not action movie-esque story about a gang and its members, not whatever this is.
This isn't about Earth. Come midnight, Christmas Day, Santa Claus is coming to town, and unless we stop him, he is going to put the universe on the naughty list.
So when it came time to consider what Saints Row 5 might look like, Volition had a lot to consider. Would they revert back to Saints Row's original vibes? Strike some kind of balance? Double down on the madness the way they did between the third and fourth games? Well, it would be pretty hard to achieve that last one. Not only are fans split on the direction the games have taken, but it's hard to even imagine what a weirder version of the series could look like. You could say that Volition flew a little too close to the sun with Saints Row 4. They out-weirded themselves. Not unlike Mass Effect 3's ending or the impossibly high standards the next Elder Scrolls game has to live up to, Saints Row kind of backed themselves into a corner here. They put out a product that players have very strong opinions on, and it would take more than the superpowered president of the United States to please them all. Which is probably why they decided to keep moving forward with the times. Instead of trying to play with the current timeline, Saints Row 5 is a full reboot. Gone is the gang that the players have become familiar with. Gone are the superpowers, alien invasions, and journeys through hell. In their place are entirely new casts of characters, hoverboards, and wingsuits. The cityscape of the past games is being replaced by an empty desert and a sparsely populated, brightly colored town. And the customization options? Well, they still look incredible. Overall, Saints Row 5 is looking to return to its roots and keep things mostly grounded in reality. This is something a lot of fans have been wanting, so you'd think the choice would be received really well. But early reactions to this upcoming release have been as mixed as the reception to the rest of the series. Some reviewers and publications are praising the new finishing moves, unique weapons, and change of scenery. Others are complaining about the admittedly bland aesthetics, uninspired gameplay, and unoriginal characters. Instead of returning to the series' roots, Saints Row 5 may have gotten lost on its way, and now it's wandering around the desert, lost and directionless. In their pursuit of realism, Volition seems to have forgotten what made their games charming and notable in the first place. For some, it was the wacky chaos, and the devs have chosen to largely omit that, but for others, it was the story and characters. Try as they might, the devs may have also accidentally omitted that as well. The first few comments on this official Saints Row YouTube video really illustrate an issue that plagues the impending release. Not to mention that everything from the characters' clothes and haircuts to the way the game's world looks and feels is stuck in the 2010s, which wouldn't necessarily be terrible if there was a more prominent style to the whole thing. But Saints Row 5's commitment to realism means that for the most part, the world and the people in it are bland, even stale. And that's actually the biggest issue with all the footage we've seen so far. The game feels stale. Not bad, not series-ruining, but just fine. Which is not a word that's ever been used to describe a Saints Row game before. Based on everything Volition has released so far, there's a distinct lack of innovation going on in SR5. It's like a paint-by-numbers version of what the game should really be. But this is what happens when you push a series to the absolute limit of weirdness without planning an exit strategy. In an effort to distinguish themselves from other titles, Saints Row gave themselves a new identity with the third and fourth games. Whether you loved it or hated it, it was objectively a good direction to go in as far as the developer's bottom line goes. And on a more subjective level, the later releases in the Saints Row series did some pretty incredible and innovative things with their game design. They weren't afraid to try out new and bizarre ideas because the games were new and bizarre themselves. They put out a lot of thought and artistic effort into development without taking the games too seriously. And there's a lot of merit in that approach to game making. But this new reboot doesn't seem to be concerned with the artistry of game development. It seems to mostly be concerned with staying on top of gaming trends, or hopping on them several years too late, which is only going to harm the overall feel of the title. Perhaps a big part of this move into a stale future is the loss of a lot of the original Saints Row developers. Writer Steve Jaros left Volition in 2014 for Valve, designer and director Scott Phillips moved on to Ubisoft, producer Greg Donovan has a senior position at ZeniMax, and several others were cut during layoffs in 2013 after the failed release of Volition's Agents of Mayhem. So we know that Saints Row 5's development has not been a smooth road. The game's release was delayed by 6 months for additional polish, which is commendable. It's better to delay a game rather than force your dev team to crunch right up to the deadline. But the most recent footage we've seen of the game isn't exactly what players have come to expect from AAA developers, and 6 months of polish won't fix a lot of the baseline issues we've talked about today. Now, Saints Row 5 could still surprise us. Like we said, it looks fine, and it could even be fun, but it is very clearly lacking any of the style of the previous games, which begs the question, why can't we just let games be weird? The AAA industry has this growing obsession with making every game as grounded and realistic as possible. Like we said in our NFL Blitz video, some games are using realism to their advantage, but a lot of them are using it to their detriment. Some games should just be weird. Maybe not Satan-punching, time-traveling, alien-invading levels of weird, depending on your preference, but there needs to be a room for a series to experiment without fear of this idea of being misplaced or unrealistic. Saints Row had carved out a place for that experimentation, but now they're backtracking, and they've lost a lot of the talented people doing that experimentation in the first place. Whether or not this will end up being the right decision is still up in the air, but regardless, it's a sad decision for the gaming industry on the whole, one that discourages creativity and outside-the-box thinking. Hey, but that's just where we stand. Now we want to hear from you. Are you excited for Saints Row 5? Or do you think it looks unoriginal and boring? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to Nerdstalgic Gaming and like this video if you want to see more content like this.